Have you ever walked away from an argument after saying everything perfectly, only to feel weaker instead of stronger? You had the facts. You had the better logic. You even had the calmer voice at the beginning. And yet, when it was over, something in you felt drained, exposed, strangely diminished. That is because in the world we live in, winning the sentence is not always the same as winning the moment. Sometimes the moment you start explaining yourself to the wrong person, you quietly hand them access to your center. And that is the part most people never say out loud. We are told that healthy people communicate, clarify, defend their intentions, correct false assumptions, and make themselves understood. But modern life has created a strange theater of performance where many conversations are no longer honest attempts to understand. They are status tests. They are bait. They are little social auditions disguised as misunderstandings. Some people do not ask questions because they want truth. They ask because they want leverage. They want to see how quickly you break formation and rush to justify your existence. If you have ever felt yourself over-explaining to a boss, to a partner, to a parent, to a stranger online, or even to people who already decided how they wanted to see you, then you know exactly what I mean. You can feel your dignity start to slip while your mouth is still moving. You keep talking because some part of you believes the next sentence will finally fix it. But often the opposite happens. The more you explain, the more the room senses that your piece is now negotiable. So in this video, we are going deeper than simple advice like, stay calm, or, pick your battles. We are going to look at why arguments so often become traps, why explanation can become a form of surrender, and how Stoic discipline combined with a sharper reading of human nature can help you move through conflict without losing your dignity. And stay with me, because near the end I'm going to give you a practical framework for exactly what to do in those moments when your chest tightens, your mind starts building a defense, and every part of you wants to prove that you are not the person they think you are. Welcome to StoicCraft, where we do not use ancient philosophy as decoration. We use it as a tool to survive the emotional chaos of modern life with more clarity, more restraint, and more real power. Today's subject matters because almost every adult in America knows what it feels like to be pulled into conversations that are not really about the issue on the surface. It happens at work when a colleague questions your judgment in front of other people. It happens in relationships when one careless sentence reopens an old wound. It happens online when strangers act as if your attention belongs to them. And it happens in families, where history can turn one small disagreement into 10 years of buried resentment speaking through fresh words. What makes all of this exhausting is not only the conflict itself. It is the confusion. Most people think tension comes from disagreement. Often it does not. Tension comes from what disagreement threatens: identity, pride, belonging, image, control. That is why two people can be discussing something small and still feel as if the room has filled with danger. The words are small. The nervous system is not. The ego is not. The need to be seen correctly is not. Maybe that is why so many people feel tired in ways sleep cannot fix. They are not only working jobs and paying bills and trying to love well. They are also dragging around invisible conversations that never really ended. They are replaying comments from meetings, family dinners, text messages, breakups, and social media threads. They are carrying unfinished defenses in their minds like unpaid emotional debts. A lot of adults look strong on the outside while secretly living in a loop of trying to be understood by people who were never offering real understanding to begin with. So here is what we are going to do. First, we will expose the hidden mechanics of arguments and why so many of them are never really about truth. Then we will look at the emotional trap of defending yourself and why it usually deepens the very dynamic you are trying to escape. After that, we will move into a more strategic Stoic approach: observation before reaction, validation before logic, curiosity before correction, silence before self-betrayal. And finally, we will close with concrete ways to apply this in work, family, relationships, and public life so this does not remain theory. This needs to feel like something you can carry into your next difficult conversation. Part 1: The moment you start proving, you start leaking power. Most people do not realize how fast energy changes when they enter defense mode. 1 second you are simply present. The next second, you are explaining your tone, explaining your choice, explaining your intention, explaining why you said what you said, explaining why what they assumed about you is not true. And while it sounds noble, something subtle begins to happen underneath the words. You stop standing in your own center and start moving toward theirs. You are no longer grounded in what is real. You are negotiating with their perception of you. That is why arguments can feel so exhausting even when you remain polite. It is not only because of what is said. It is because explanation, when given to the wrong person, creates a hidden hierarchy. The person making the accusation sits in the seat of judgment. The person defending becomes the applicant. Without meaning to, you begin presenting evidence that you deserve to be understood. You begin acting as if clarity must be earned from someone who may have never been interested in fairness at all. Think about how often this happens in ordinary life. A manager questions your judgment in a meeting, not with open curiosity, but with that subtle tone that invites the room to doubt you. A partner says, "That's not what you meant." Then why did it sound like that? A family member twists your silence into guilt or your boundaries into disrespect. In each case, the content is different, but the emotional structure is the same. You feel the pull to repair the image of yourself in their mind. You rush to close the gap. You start proving. And that is usually the exact moment your power starts draining out through your words. If you pay close attention, you can feel this even in your body. Your breathing gets shallower. Your explanation becomes faster. Your tone loses its natural rhythm and becomes slightly more careful, slightly more pressured, slightly less free. You stop speaking from conviction and start speaking from urgency. And urgency is expensive. It makes you reveal too much, say too much, and hand away more context than the situation deserved. The Stoics understood something modern people forget every day: not every misunderstanding deserves immediate correction. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself but to your estimate of it. In modern language, that means the event is often less dangerous than the meaning your mind attaches to it. Someone's opinion of you can feel like a threat because your mind treats it as if your identity depends on their conclusion. But it does not. And the faster you remember that, the less likely you are to hand your peace to someone who has not earned that access. Part 2: Arguments are often not searches for truth, but tests of ego. This is where the script has to get a little more honest, maybe even a little darker. Because many people are not confused. They are strategic. They may not look strategic in the cinematic villain sense. They may look ordinary, smiling, reasonable, even wounded. But human beings learn very early that social life rewards perception, not purity. In families, offices, friend groups, and institutions, people often discover that being right matters less than appearing right, sounding right, or making someone else look unstable. Once you see that, you stop walking into every conversation as if it were a courtroom of reason. Machiavelli is useful here not because he teaches cruelty, but because he strips away sentimental illusions about how power moves through human systems. A great deal of social conflict is not about principles. It is about positioning. People challenge you publicly because public settings create witnesses. They phrase things ambiguously because ambiguity gives them escape routes. They press you emotionally because emotional reactions are easier to use against you than measured silence. This is why some people seem disappointed when you answer calmly. They were not seeking clarity. They were seeking exposure. That may sound harsh, but if you are an adult who has spent enough time in modern institutions, you have already seen it. You have seen people weaponize sincerity. You have seen fake concern used as a softer form of control. You have seen someone ask for honesty, only to punish the honest answer. You have seen people talk about communication while rewarding performance. This is the surreal quality of modern social life. Everyone speaks the language of empathy, but many still operate by dominance, insecurity, and image management beneath the surface. You can even see it in the way some conversations begin with softness and end in quiet humiliation. The language sounds civilized, but the emotional objective is conquest. A person says, "I'm only trying to understand," while clearly trying to pin you down. Another says, "I just think accountability matters," when what they really want is control over the narrative. Another says, "You seem defensive," after provoking you until defense became almost inevitable. Once you recognize these patterns, the world looks less innocent, but it also becomes easier to navigate without losing yourself. Once you understand this, you do not become cynical. You become precise. You stop assuming every emotional invitation is sincere. You stop stepping into every ring just because someone drew a circle around you. And most importantly, you stop measuring your worth by your ability to make unwilling people understand you. Some people do not misunderstand you accidentally. They misunderstand you profitably. Part 3. The room changes before the words do. If you think back to your most painful arguments, you will notice something important. The shift often happened before the harshest sentence was even spoken. It showed up in the body first. A pause that felt too sharp. A jaw that tightened. A smile that disappeared just a little too quickly. A question that was technically neutral but carried the smell of accusation. Human beings are constantly reading each other beneath language, and by the time the words become obvious, the nervous systems in the room may already be preparing for battle. That is why emotional control is not just about saying the right line. It begins with learning to observe atmosphere. Before you answer, notice the temperature. Is this person genuinely trying to understand, or are they collecting emotional data? Are they open, or are they loading the room against you? Are they confused, or are they committed to a version of you that benefits their pride? These are not paranoid questions. They are mature questions. They are the questions of someone who understands that conversation is not merely verbal. It is relational, psychological, and often deeply symbolic. One of the biggest reasons people lose themselves in conflict is that they enter the content too soon. They start debating facts while the emotional frame is already collapsing. They answer the sentence but ignore the structure. They defend the point while missing the power move. In doing so, they end up fighting on ground that was chosen for them. And once that happens, even a truthful answer can make you look reactive. Maybe you have lived this in a room where everyone suddenly went quiet after one loaded comment. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody slammed the table. But you could feel the trap open. You answered the literal question while realizing too late that the real event was reputational. The issue was not what you knew. It was whether you would remain composed under subtle pressure. Many adults have had this happen in meetings, in co-parenting conversations, in family gatherings, in performance reviews, and in breakup discussions where the other person no longer wanted repair so much as moral advantage. So slow down. Notice before you participate. Observation is not passivity. It is positioning. When you observe first, you can tell whether the conversation should be clarified, redirected, softened, delayed, or abandoned. You start becoming someone who is difficult to manipulate, not because you are cold, but because you no longer mistake urgency for importance. Part 4. Why defending yourself usually makes people push harder. Here is one of the strangest truths about human conflict. When you rush to defend yourself, many people do not become calmer. They become more confident. Your defense signals that the arrow found skin. It tells them they touched something alive. And once they sense emotional access, some people lean in harder, not softer. You can watch this happen in everyday conversations. Someone says something slightly unfair, and before they have even finished, you begin explaining. Instantly, the rhythm changes. They interrupt more. They sharpen their tone. They begin acting less like a person in dialogue and more like a prosecutor hearing a witness squirm. That is not because your explanation was irrational. It is because your explanation confirmed that they now have the power to set the frame. This is why Seneca's wisdom matters so much in modern life. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. The moment someone challenges us, the mind races far ahead. We imagine disrespect, rejection, humiliation, future damage, social loss. Then we start speaking from that imagined collapse. We are no longer answering one comment. We are trying to rescue the entire story of ourselves from falling apart. That is why the response becomes too long, too urgent, too loaded. We are not defending a point. We are defending our imagined survival. There is also something humbling here. Sometimes what makes us defend ourselves so fiercely is not strength, but an old wound that still wants instant relief. Maybe you grew up around criticism. Maybe you had to justify yourself to authority figures who never listened. Maybe you learned early that being misunderstood had consequences. If that is true, then today's arguments do not arrive in a clean present moment. They wake up old alarm systems. They touch places in you that were trained to explain quickly in order to stay safe. But when you catch that process in real time, a different kind of strength becomes possible. You realize that you do not need to answer every distortion at full volume. You do not need to rush to restore your image on command. Sometimes the strongest answer is a pause long enough to let the bait die in open air. Sometimes the strongest answer is one sentence instead of 10. Sometimes the strongest answer is no answer at all, because your silence refuses the false trial they were trying to hold. Part 5. The small space between stimulus and response is where power returns. Epictetus built an entire philosophy around the distinction between what is within our control and what is not. That idea sounds simple until somebody says something that lands in your chest like a blade. Then suddenly it is not philosophical anymore. It is physical. Your face gets warm. Your pulse changes. Your mind starts constructing a rebuttal at incredible speed. And that is exactly why this teaching matters. Between what happens and what you do, there is a space. Most people know this as a quote. Very few know it as a discipline. In real life, that space is small, almost microscopic. It may last one breath, or half a breath. But if you learn to enter it, everything changes. In that space you can notice, I am being pulled. I am starting to perform. I want to defend. I want to be seen correctly. I want to undo the discomfort right now. The moment you can name the impulse, you are no longer entirely owned by it. And that is where Stoic practice becomes practical. The goal is not to become numb. It is not to become emotionally dead or indifferent to injustice. The goal is to prevent your first feeling from becoming your master. You are allowed to feel hurt. You are allowed to recognize disrespect. But you are not required to surrender your behavior to the first wave of heat that moves through your body. Sometimes the tiny pause is as simple as letting your tongue rest for 1 second before you answer. Sometimes it means taking a sip of water. Sometimes it means looking down long enough to hear your own thoughts return. Sometimes it means saying, "Let me think about that for a second," which is not weakness at all. It is self-command made visible. Over time, this discipline gives you something rare: choice under pressure. Not fake calm. Not rehearsed detachment. Real choice. The kind that lets you hear a loaded comment and still decide whether the wisest move is to respond, ask, wait, redirect, or leave. That is when silence stops being weakness and starts becoming active command over yourself. Part 6. Curiosity disarms what defense feeds. One of the most underused forms of strength is calm curiosity. When people expect resistance and receive inquiry instead, the energy often changes immediately. A person who came prepared for a fight can suddenly find themselves with nowhere to place their aggression. The emotional machine stalls because the expected pattern is broken. This does not mean you turn every insult into a therapy session. It means that when the situation is still salvageable, curiosity can create a door where defense would have built a wall. Instead of saying, "That's not true, let me explain," you say, "Tell me what made you see it that way." Instead of rushing to correct, you ask, "What part of this bothered you most?" Instead of reacting to the accusation, you investigate the fear, frustration, or assumption underneath it. Why does this work? Because people are often far more committed to being felt than to being right. The visible argument may be about a decision, a tone, or a detail. The hidden argument is often about something else: feeling dismissed, feeling unimportant, feeling excluded, feeling embarrassed, feeling powerless. When curiosity touches that layer, the temperature drops. Not always, but often enough that it becomes one of the most valuable tools you can carry. And there is something else. Curiosity protects your dignity because it keeps you from shrinking into the role of the accused. You are not begging to be understood. You are gathering information. You are slowing the pace. You are making the invisible visible. This is not weakness. It is conversational aikido. You are using calm attention to redirect force rather than collide with it head-on. There is a deeply practical side to this too. A bad faith critic often depends on vagueness. They say, "You always make things difficult," or "You clearly didn't think this through," or "You never really care." Curiosity forces substance. What specifically feels difficult here? Which part do you think I missed? What would caring look like to you in this situation? Sometimes this reveals something useful. Sometimes it exposes emptiness. Either way, you regain ground. Part 7. Validation before logic, the truth most people resist. This is the part many intelligent people hate, because it feels unfair. You can be correct and still need to address emotion first. You can have the better argument and still fail if the other person feels cornered, embarrassed, or unseen. That is not a defect in logic. It is a fact about human beings. People do not open their minds when their dignity is under attack. They protect themselves. They harden. They gather counterexamples. They reinterpret your words through the lens of threat. Even a good point can sound like a weapon when pride has already entered the room. That is why so many arguments become endless loops. Both people keep increasing the force of their logic while completely ignoring the emotional bruise that is deciding the outcome. Validation does not mean surrendering your position. It does not mean pretending they are right when they are wrong. It means acknowledging the part that can be acknowledged without betraying truth. I can see why that landed badly. I understand why you'd be frustrated. I get why that would concern you. These are not weak lines. They are stabilizers. They tell the nervous system, we are not in a war right now. This is also where many adults fail with the people they love most. They hear emotion and immediately go to correction because correction feels efficient. But efficiency is not the same as repair. If your spouse, sibling, or friend says they felt ignored, the first need is rarely a polished defense of your timeline. The first need is to feel that their experience registered somewhere inside you. Once that happens, truth can move more cleanly. Aristotle said patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. In conflict, that bitter patience often looks like delaying your best point long enough to create a space where it can actually be heard. The insecure mind wants to correct first. The disciplined mind knows that truth delivered into a closed heart usually returns as more noise. Part 8. Pride is often the real opponent in the room. Many arguments continue long after the facts have become clear because the real issue is no longer the facts. It is face. It is image. It is the unbearable possibility of losing position in front of another person. Once pride fuses with a viewpoint, the conversation stops being about understanding and starts becoming a struggle to avoid humiliation. This is where a mature reading of human nature becomes essential. If someone's self-respect is now tied to not giving you the point, pressing harder will usually make them cling tighter. The more directly you corner them, the more fiercely they defend. Not because they are wicked, necessarily, but because most people would rather preserve dignity than submit to correction in a way that makes them feel small. Think about the workplace. A senior colleague makes a bad call. Everyone in the room knows it. If you expose the mistake in a way that publicly reduces them, they may resist your idea even if it is obviously better. Not because the idea is flawed, but because acceptance now feels like self-erasure. The same thing happens in marriages, friendships, family systems, and public discourse. Pride hijacks reality. The position becomes sacred because the ego has climbed inside it. You can even see this in yourself if you are honest. There have likely been moments when what hurt most was not that the other person disagreed, but that they did it in a way that made you feel small. Pride is not always loud arrogance. Sometimes it is simply the part of us that cannot tolerate shame. And unless we understand that tenderness inside human beings, we will keep trying to solve emotional problems with intellectual force. The wiser move is often to leave someone a dignified path to change. Maybe we're looking at different parts of the same problem. I used to think that too until I noticed something else. There may be another angle here. These lines sound softer, but they are often more effective because they make transformation possible without demanding self-destruction. A person who feels trapped will fight. A person who sees a doorway may walk through it on their own. Part 9. What this looks like at work. Let's make this practical. Imagine you are in a meeting. You present an idea you've worked on for days. A colleague leans back, half smiles, and says, "I'm not sure you've thought through the operational side of this." It is subtle enough to sound professional, but pointed enough to make the room shift. In that instant, you feel the familiar rush. You want to show your competence. You want everyone to know you did the work. You want to reclaim the room. This is where most people lose themselves. They start over-explaining. They speak too quickly. They begin throwing data into the air like shields. But the room is no longer evaluating only the content. It is evaluating composure. If you panic, you appear less credible, not more. If you become sharp, you confirm tension. If you explain excessively, you signal insecurity even when the substance is solid. A more strategic response sounds different. That's a fair concern. Which part feels least workable to you? Notice what that does. It validates just enough to remove the appearance of fragility. It turns accusation into specificity. It makes them leave the vague zone and enter the real one. Often, the challenge weakens immediately because many public challenges depend on atmosphere more than depth. Once clarity is required, the performance collapses. Now imagine a second version. Your boss forwards an email chain and asks why a deadline slipped. The facts are complicated. Several people contributed. But the way the question is asked makes it feel as if the entire problem now belongs to you. If you respond from panic, you start narrating every detail in an effort to protect yourself. Suddenly the message becomes longer than the original issue, and the emotional odor of defensiveness fills the thread. Instead, a steadier response might be, here are the two main reasons for the delay, what I controlled, and what I'm doing next. Short. Clean. Forward-moving. No self-begging. No emotional leakage. And if the concern is legitimate, even better. Now you have preserved your dignity while gathering useful feedback. You are no longer fighting for image. You are guiding the room. This is the kind of presence people remember. Not because it is loud, but because it is difficult to shake. Over time, that changes your professional reputation more than brilliance without composure ever will. Part 10: What this looks like in love, family, and old wounds. Conflict at work can be strategic. Conflict at home is often more intimate and more painful because it touches history. When someone close to you says, "You always do this," they are rarely talking only about the moment in front of you. They are speaking from a pile of accumulated emotion, memory, disappointment, fear, and old interpretations. That is why these arguments can feel impossible to win. You are not debating one sentence. You are standing in the shadow of 10 unfinished conversations. Here, defending yourself usually fails even faster. You say, "That's not true," and they hear, "Your pain is invalid." You explain your intention, and they hear, "Your experience does not count." You list the facts, and they feel even more alone. Again, this is not fair in the abstract. But fairness is often not the first doorway to peace. Try something different. I can hear that this hits something bigger than just tonight. I don't want to rush past what you're feeling. I may see it differently, but I can tell this mattered to you. Those lines do not erase your reality. They simply refuse to trample the emotional truth in the room while you sort out the factual one. A lot of family arguments are not really about the dishes, the holiday plans, the text that went unanswered, or the tone at dinner. They are about old roles. The responsible one. The difficult one. The peacemaker. The disappointment. The child who still wants to be seen correctly. If you do not recognize those roles, you will keep trying to solve ancestral tension with present-day logic. But logic has almost no effect when a system is replaying identity. And sometimes, especially in families, the wisest move is not to go deeper in the moment at all. Some conversations are too flooded to solve in real time. Some people regress into older versions of themselves the moment tension rises. In those moments, silence is not avoidance. It is containment. It is the decision not to let one emotional storm write a script you will both regret. Adults who learn this become anchors in rooms that used to swallow them. Part 11: What this looks like online, where everyone wants a reaction. Nowhere is this lesson more necessary than online. Digital platforms have turned human insecurity into a marketplace. Outrage gets rewarded. Speed gets rewarded. Humiliation gets rewarded. And because there are no physical cues, people become even more reckless with projection. A stranger who knows nothing about your life can speak to you with complete certainty, not because they understand you, but because certainty performs well in public. This creates a dangerous illusion. It makes people feel as if they must answer everything, correct everything, clarify everything, protect their image in front of an invisible crowd. But this is one of the fastest ways to become emotionally enslaved. When your peace depends on managing every false impression, you will never rest. The crowd always wants one more explanation. Machiavelli would have recognized this instantly. Public arenas favor spectacle. They reward what appears victorious, not what is inwardly balanced. The more reactive you become, the easier you are to use. The calmer you remain, the harder you are to script. That is why selective silence online is not cowardice. It is intelligence. It is a refusal to build your inner life inside an arena designed to fragment attention and provoke impulsive display. There is something almost surreal about the modern digital world. People beg for authenticity while punishing imperfection. They preach compassion while feeding on exposure. They speak in the language of justice while acting out private envy in public. If you do not develop an internal standard stronger than the crowd's temperature, you will end up shaping yourself around moods that were never worthy of your soul. You do not have to attend every invitation to self-betrayal. You do not have to answer every distortion, every bad faith reading, every manipulative provocation disguised as just asking. Your life is bigger than the comment section. Your nervous system is more precious than the algorithm. The ancient Stoics did not have social media, but they understood mobs, vanity, reputation, and the temptation to live through public judgment. The principle is the same now as it was then. If you let the crowd define your emotional weather, you will never know real freedom. Part 12, Silence is not submission, it is disciplined selection. A lot of people confuse silence with weakness because they only know two modes, speaking or surrendering. But silence, used properly, is neither. It is disciplined selection. It is the ability to decide that not everything deserves your voice, your explanation, your correction, your autobiographical defense, or your emotional labor. Sometimes silence says, I see what this is, and I will not feed it. Sometimes it says, I do not need to prove my character inside a distorted frame. Sometimes it says, this conversation is too immature for the truth I would have to spend to participate in it. And sometimes silence says the most powerful thing of all, I belong to myself more than I belong to your opinion of me. This kind of silence is difficult because it forces you to tolerate temporary misunderstanding. That is the real pain. Many people do not fear conflict itself as much as they fear being misread. They fear not being seen accurately. They fear walking away while the other person still believes the wrong story. But adulthood teaches a hard lesson here. Some stories about you will survive no matter how beautifully you explain. The question is whether you are willing to injure yourself trying to erase them. There is often a lonely phase in learning this. You stop over-explaining, and at first it feels unnatural, almost guilty. You worry that you are being cold. You worry that you should have said more. You replay the moment and imagine better sentences. But with time, you begin to notice something extraordinary. Many situations did not need your extra words at all. Your fear was louder than reality. Your old conditioning wanted the familiar relief of explanation. Your wiser self wanted freedom. True silence is not coldness. It can coexist with warmth, empathy, even love. It is simply self-respect with boundaries. It knows that words are expensive. It knows that attention is finite. It knows that every unnecessary defense is a tax on your peace. And once you start living from that awareness, you become much harder to provoke. Part 13, the energy you stop wasting becomes the life you start building. There is another cost to arguments that people rarely discuss. Every defensive conversation steals more than a moment. It steals momentum. It steals mental clarity. It steals the emotional steadiness you needed for the work, creativity, parenting, leadership, healing, or rest that actually matters. One bad exchange can sit in your body for hours. Sometimes days. The words end, but the nervous system keeps replaying them like unfinished music. Imagine what happens when that becomes a lifestyle. You start each week already carrying residue. Your mind wakes up in old conversations. Your energy goes to rehearsed rebuttals instead of real life. You become productive in appearance but internally divided. And because so many modern environments normalize friction, you may not even realize how much of your life is being consumed by unnecessary psychological recovery. Maybe you know this feeling already. You are driving home and replaying a meeting that ended 3 hours ago. You are folding laundry while building speeches for a conversation that will never happen. You are out with people you love, yet part of your mind is still standing in yesterday's argument trying to finally say the perfect thing. This is one of the quietest forms of self-loss. Your body is in the present, but your dignity still feels trapped in some other room. This is why choosing silence, restraint, and strategic disengagement is not merely about peace. It is about allocation. It is about deciding where your life force will go. Will it go into endless image management? Or into your craft, your health, your relationships, your future, your actual character? The person who stops explaining themselves to everyone suddenly finds that they have more time to become undeniable. And that is one of the deepest shifts of all. At first, you want people to understand you. Later, you want to understand yourself. At first, you want to win the moment. Later, you want to protect your trajectory. At first, you think power means the ability to respond brilliantly. Later, you realize power often means the ability not to spend yourself where no wisdom can grow. Part 14, how people begin to treat you differently when you stop taking every bait. One of the quiet rewards of this practice is that it changes not only how you feel, but how others approach you. People begin to sense that they cannot easily pull you into emotional theater. They notice that you do not scramble when challenged. They notice that you do not flood the room with self-justification. They notice that when you speak, it is measured. And when you do not speak, it does not look like confusion. It looks like choice. This matters more than most people realize. Social life is full of invisible testing. Some people test your boundaries. Some test your insecurity. Some test whether your identity can be shaken by disapproval. When they find constant access, they keep pushing. When they find calm limits, the dynamic changes. Not always dramatically. Often subtly. But the shift is real. You start hearing fewer careless challenges. People bring concerns differently. Disrespect becomes more expensive. Even manipulative personalities tend to move around those who are difficult to hook emotionally. Why? Because reactivity is easy to control. Composure is expensive to attack. It creates uncertainty in the other person. They cannot predict where to land the next strike because there is no obvious wound being offered. And yes, there is a darker social truth underneath this. Many people are kinder when they sense that access to you is limited. Not because kindness is fake, but because human beings often rise or fall to the standards they encounter. If you are endlessly available for emotional intrusion, some will intrude. If you become quietly self-governed, many begin to behave accordingly. The world often treats us according to the level of inner disorder we publicly tolerate. This is why quiet people are sometimes mistaken for powerful even before they have spoken much. It is not magic. It is coherence. The world senses when a person is not leaking themselves everywhere. The person feels gathered, contained, harder to move. That presence becomes a kind of authority without announcement. Part 15. This does not mean letting abuse continue. Now let's be clear. Silence is powerful, but it is not an obligation to tolerate mistreatment. There are times when directness is necessary. There are times when a boundary must be spoken plainly. There are times when withdrawal is not enough and decisive action is required. Stoicism is not passive submission. It is disciplined self-governance. If someone is repeatedly dishonest, manipulative, degrading, or abusive, the answer is not to keep smiling in enlightened stillness while your dignity erodes. The answer may be a clear boundary, distance, documentation, escalation, or departure. What we are rejecting here is not truth-telling. We are rejecting impulsive self-explanation inside frames designed to weaken you. There is a huge difference between a boundary and a defense. A defense asks to be believed. A boundary declares what will happen next. A defense tries to correct their perception. A boundary protects your reality. A defense says, "Please understand me." A boundary says, "You are free to think what you want, but this is what I will and will not participate in." For example, if someone repeatedly twists your words, you do not need to keep rewriting your soul in smaller and smaller print until they stop. A cleaner response may be, "I've clarified my position. I'm not going to keep debating my intent." If a family member keeps turning every boundary into a moral accusation, you may need to say, "I'm willing to talk when this is respectful. I'm not staying in this tone." That is not harsh. That is adult stewardship of your nervous system. For many adults, especially those raised to over-explain, over-accommodate, or keep peace at any cost, this difference is life-changing. It means you no longer have to choose between conflict and collapse. There is another path, calm firmness. Few things are more powerful than speaking one clean sentence from a settled nervous system and then refusing to turn it into a debate. Part 16, a practical framework for the next time you feel pulled into defense. So let me give you something simple and usable. The next time someone says something that makes you want to explain yourself immediately, move through these 5 steps. First, pause long enough to feel your body before you answer. Not philosophically. Physically. Notice the heat, the pressure, the acceleration. This interrupts the automatic slide into performance. Second, identify the frame. Ask yourself, is this sincere confusion, emotional pain, status play, projection, or bait? You do not need a perfect answer. You just need enough awareness to stop treating every challenge as if it deserves the same kind of response. Third, decide whether emotion needs acknowledgement before content. If the other person feels hurt, embarrassed, dismissed, or threatened, logic alone will likely fail. Offer a small validation if it is honest. "I can see why that bothered you. I hear the concern. That makes sense from where you're standing." Fourth, choose the lightest effective response. Not the longest. Not the smartest. The lightest effective response. A question. A short clarification. a boundary, a pause, or silence. Mature power is economical. Fifth, after the conversation, do not keep relitigating it in your mind for hours if you can help it. Learn what you can. Release what you cannot control. Otherwise you will keep participating internally in conflicts that ended externally long ago. And here is one more layer that matters. Practice this in small moments, not only dramatic ones. Use it when the cashier is rude, when the text message lands strangely, when the coworker's tone bothers you, when a family member pokes in a familiar place. Character is rarely built in one grand scene. It is built in the accumulation of tiny refusals to abandon yourself. This framework will not make every interaction easy, but it will stop many situations from owning your mind the way they used to. Part 17, the deeper transformation, from being understood to being unmoved. At first, people come to this kind of wisdom because they are tired of arguments. Later, they realize the deeper gift was never about arguments alone. It was about identity. It was about no longer needing every room to confirm who you are. It was about growing out of that exhausting dependence on immediate understanding. There is a profound relief in becoming a person who does not have to chase every misconception. You begin to feel a different kind of solidity inside yourself. Not arrogance. Not emotional numbness. Just steadiness. You know who you are a little more clearly. You know what deserves your effort and what does not. You know the difference between a meaningful conversation and a psychological trap. This shift changes your inner dialogue too. Instead of asking, "How do I make them see me correctly?" you begin asking, "Why am I handing this moment so much authority over my peace?" Instead of asking, "What can I say that will finally win?" you ask, "What response leaves me most intact?" That is a revolutionary change. It moves the source of power back inside. And because of that, life gets quieter in a powerful way. Not empty. Clearer. You stop feeding dynamics that once consumed whole evenings. You stop over-explaining in rooms that never respected explanation. You stop offering your inner life to every passing judgment. In their place, something else begins to grow: restraint, depth, precision, and a kind of earned peace. That peace is not accidental. It comes from repeated choices. The choice to observe before reacting. The choice to hear emotion before forcing logic. The choice to let some misunderstandings live rather than tearing yourself apart to kill them. The choice to save your voice for what is worthy of it. Eventually, those choices become character. And character becomes presence. So let's bring it all together. Most arguments are not really battles over truth. They are collisions of ego, fear, pride, and perception. The moment you rush to defend yourself, you often accept a frame that already weakens you. Observation restores control because it helps you see the emotional structure before you get trapped in the content. Curiosity can disarm what defense only feeds. Validation before logic gives difficult conversations a chance to breathe. Silence, when used with self-respect, is not passivity but disciplined choice. And boundaries matter because real strength is not endless explanation. It is clear direction. If there is one thing I want you to carry from this video, it is this: you do not need to attend every trial where your character is the topic. You do not need to bleed words just because someone demands them. Some people will only respect you after they realize they can no longer provoke you on command. Others will never understand you fully, and that must become acceptable if you want a peaceful mind. The ancient Stoics knew that self-mastery begins where compulsion ends. And in our own age, where so much of society runs on reaction, image, and emotional theater, the ability to stay grounded may be one of the rarest forms of freedom left. You do not have to become louder. You do not have to become colder. You just have to become less available to chaos. Maybe that is the final lesson here. Silence is not about disappearing. It is about refusing to disappear from yourself. It is about standing so fully inside your own values that you do not need every room to hand them back to you. It is about becoming the kind of person whose peace is built from the inside out, not rented from the unstable moods of other people. If this spoke to something you've been living through, let that be more than a moment of agreement. Let it become practice. The next time someone tries to pull you into defending, proving, or over-explaining, see if you can pause and remember, I do not need to abandon myself to be understood. And if this kind of grounded, real-world Stoic wisdom is what you want more of, support the channel with a like and subscribe to StoicCraft. It helps this work reach people who are tired of noise and hungry for something deeper, cleaner, and more useful. And I'd really like to hear from you in the comments. Where do you find this lesson hardest to apply? Work, family, relationships, or online? Your answer may help someone else feel less alone in what they're carrying. Until next time, protect your energy, guard your dignity, and remember, the strongest person in the room is not always the one who has the most to say. Often, it is the one who knows exactly when silence has become power.